Welcome back to Ecocriticism 101. This is lecture number 17, which is also, of course, the last lecture. So for everyone who has sat through all 16 lectures, thanks for that. And a special thanks to all the people who are not enrolled in the actual UCSB course, English 22, who have just watched the lectures. So I think that deserves a special thanks and commendation. So today's lecture is going to be a little unusual. And let me just jump right to the Prezi to show you what I mean. Of course, this is the Prezi, and we have been looking at this arc of Western culture going up in time and across space. But here we're going to deal with Buddhism. It's a non-Western culture, so it really doesn't fit into this arc, and it really, spatially, it even doesn't fit into it, because here we stop at North America. We'd have to sort of jump across the Pacific here. But it does fit in time-wise, and it's roughly the same time, Buddhist thinking, the birth of the Buddha, with Greek thinking. So it kind of fits in there. It's a few centuries before the birth of Christianity. So why do this tradition? Why do this separate tradition? Well, it makes a very interesting counterpoint, Buddhism, to the Western tradition. The idea of dualism, of mind-body dualism, a separate metaphysical realm, the idea of the importance of permanence, none of that is in Buddhism, and sort of challenges it. I could have used other traditions other than Buddhism. In fact, there are all sorts of indigenous cultures that would be really interesting to look at. But Buddhism, it addresses some of these issues in a very sort of point-to-point way that I hope will help illuminate the Western tradition and how that is playing out. So we might just think that these things are natural, that dualism is just part of the way that human beings think, but it's not. Other cultures reveal that it isn't. And the other thing is, Buddhism is still alive and very much well today. There are over 500 million people who self-identify as Buddhist. We're principally going to be looking at the thinking of one Buddhist thinker, which is Thich Nhat Hanh. The reason we're going to do that is I'm not an expert in Buddhism. So when it came to the other things that we were talking about in the class, I read, Greek and Latin and German and some of the languages we've been doing, and I've, published on these things. But Buddhism is something that I really can't say that I have any expertise in a scholarly sense. So we're going to rely on Thich Nhat Hanh. Along with, I think, the Dalai Lama. I think most people would generally acknowledge that Hanh is probably the most influential Buddhist thinker of the modern age. And he's been very important. He was a Zen Buddhist monk from Vietnam. He's 95 now, so he's been around for quite a while. He was around during the Vietnam War. He protested the war in Vietnam, left to go to a peace talk, and they didn't let him back in, which was actually to the great benefit of the West, because he set up a monastery in the south of France, Plum Village, that has become, I think, probably the largest Buddhist monastery that's in the West at this point. So, very interesting thinker. If you're intrigued by some of this thinking, I tried to bring it primarily from one book, which is his The Art of Living. It's a relatively slim book. You might want to think about getting it. But also note here that because I'm relying on that thinking, there isn't going to be a separate reading for this lecture. So instead, you're going to see some very large quotes in the Prezi. They're going to be a little difficult that way. I try to keep the Prezi quotes relatively small, but these are going to be large. So you might have to, if you're watching this, on YouTube, to stop every now and again to read everything and then continue on. But the other way, of course, is that they will be available on the PDFs, which contain everything that has, that's on the Prezi. So in that sense, the PDFs for this week are actually the reading for this week. So it's a little confusing, but I thought this was just a kind of a better way of doing it. But it does have a bit of a shortcoming when you actually get to the readings, the Prezis themselves, and you'll see this right away as we go. So we're dealing with some issues here. Let's talk about Buddhism and earlier and later traditions to try to pinpoint it. So many of these quotes are, again, coming right from Thich Nhat Hanh. According to Han, the spiritual context of India at the time had, a lot of impact on the subsequent rise of Buddhism. Things here like reincarnation, karma, retribution. According to Han, these are not originally Buddhist concepts. They were already well established when the Buddha began teaching. In fact, they were not at all at the heart of what the Buddha taught. So the argument here is that don't be confused, because you're going to find, in Buddhist teaching things like reincarnation and retribution. According to Han, this is because, in part, the Buddha didn't write anything down himself. It was only maybe a couple centuries later that people are beginning to write it down, and other things are going to be incorporated from the earlier tradition in India at the time. So to Han and others, in looking at the core beliefs of Buddhism and what the Buddha said, you're not going to find those things. So it's a little confusing because you might hear a lot about Buddhism and something like reincarnation, but to many Buddhist thinkers like Thich Nhat Hanh, it's just not part of what Buddhism is. And one of the problems is because, as Han notes, the idea of reincarnation suggests that there is a separate soul, self, or spirit that somehow leaves the body at death, flies away, and then reincarnates in another body. So to be very clear here, you have to subscribe, or would probably subscribe, to some sort of dualism and to have this belief, because there's a continuity of soul or self across bodies. This implies that the mind and body can be separate from each other, and although the body is impermanent, the mind in itself is somehow permanent. We've seen all this before, right? And this is exactly what you would have in the Western tradition. But according to Thich Nhat Hanh, neither of these ideas is in accord with the deepest teaching of Buddhism. So it's a really strong statement that Han is doing here, because he's trying to recover sort of the original Buddhism, and traditions like this, he's saying, is just not part of it. And that will be important when we look at the notion of the self in Buddhism, which we'll do in a little bit. It can't work, and I think Han is right. It's just reincarnation, when you actually look at it in terms of the system of Buddhism, it's incongruous. It doesn't quite fit into the idea of it. So what Han argues, and again, it's just to help clarify, because you may have had preconceived notions of Buddhism, that there are really two kinds of Buddhism: popular Buddhism and what he calls deep Buddhism. And, different audiences require different things, according to Thich Nhat Hanh. And he notes here that, many temples display vivid images of what can happen to us in the hell realm. For example, if we lie in this lifetime, our tongue will be cut out. This sounds a lot like the dualism of Christianity as well. But Han sees this as not central to Buddhism. This is a kind of skillful means to motivate people in their lives. This approach may help some people, but may not help others. The final thing here, though, these teachings are not in accord with the ultimate truth, the Dharma. So you may see depictions of hell in Buddhism, and it's, Han's argument here as well, that's something that a culture set up to sort of, keep people in line, and to use it as sort of a way of influencing morality and things like that. But according to him, it's just not central to Buddhism. I just want to clarify it, because, otherwise you might think that this is sort of Western thinking, a parallel to Western thinking here, but it's not quite. In fact, Buddhism is, and I'll get to it in a moment, people like Han argue that it's not quite a religion, it's a practice. And as a consequence, a group of people went to the Buddha, young people, and asked, what should we believe? And the Buddha says, don't believe anything, not even what I tell you. Even if it's an ancient teaching, even if it's taught by a highly revered teacher, you should use your intelligence and critical mind and carefully examine everything you see or hear, and then put those teachings into practice. So the notion here is that this is not meant to be dogma in the sense of a teaching. You may disagree with some of what even the Buddha has to say, and that's a remarkable statement, right? Because we had with fundamentalist way of reading a text like the Bible, the notion that you have to believe everything that's there, right? And if it says that the world was created 6,000 years ago, the universe was, you have to believe that because it says believe everything. This is different. This is saying don't believe anything. Don't believe anything that you can't test out, and test it out through your own practice. And in that sense, it's a remarkable way of approaching the world. I'm not calling it a religion, but a way of approaching the world where your goal is to try to understand the world better. You will have teachers to help you along the way, but really, it's your own practice, and that practice will be part of meditative practice to do that. Just to clarify, the West has had lots of encounters with Buddhism. We're going to actually end by talking about Henry David Thoreau and to see the influence that it had on him. But really, it begins in the second half of the 20th century, the modern encounter, which coincidentally, and perhaps not so coincidentally, coincides with the modern environmentalist movement. Jack Kiriwak, for example, you may know him from On the Road, but also wrote a little novel called Dharma Bums, which also takes place for a short period of time in Santa Barbara, so it's fun to read. But it talks about the early Western encounter with it. So what we have today, however, in the early 21st century is often something called secular Buddhism or Buddhism agnosticism. And it's become very influential, especially with mindfulness practices. So if you're familiar with mindfulness or meditative practices, chances are that that flavor of it that you know from people like, well, I guess from a lot of different people, but that has been influenced by Buddhism. So like John Kabat-Zinn and that sort of movement. So continuing on here. This is Robert Wright, and I'll tell you the book that I'm quoting from here. But he's a person who wrote a book about it, which is actually very instrumental as well. So what's presented today as an ancient meditative practice is actually a selective rendering of that practice, and as he notes, there's no scandal here. And what really he's saying in this quote is that Buddhism has a long history, right, coming out of India into China, into Japan, Vietnam, elsewhere. And each place that it goes, including the United States, and it really comes to the United States in a big way in the second half of the 20th century, it adapts and changes each time. So again, it's very different than like a religion that is highly, fundamentalist, because it will adapt and change, and different cultures will take different things from it and focus on different things and all. And as Wright says, there's no scandal there. The fact that it changes, the fact that American Buddhism will be very different than Vietnamese Buddhism, it makes total sense because it's adapted by each culture that it has. Yep. So it's just an important point to note about types of Buddhism. Yeah, mindfulness practices isn't the same as the ancient mindfulness meditation practice, although that I think is changing because there was because of people like John Kabat-Zinn, there was kind of a simplification of mindfulness practices and focusing just on meditation as opposed to something like metta, loving kindness meditation and all. But I think that's generally coming into meditation practice now. It's kind of an esoteric issue, but just to know that it's not exactly the same as the original tradition. But here Wright makes a rather amazing thing. So if you've seen if you've seen the movie The Matrix, you know all about the fact that, Neo is living what he thinks is in the real world, and then, he takes that red pill and he suddenly discovers that's not the real world at all. Wright thinks that's a pretty good parallel for Buddhism. So you think the world you're living in is the real world, Buddhism is the red pill. Mindfulness practice is the red pill that'll let you realize that there's something other than this existence. It's not a metaphysical realm, though, to be very clear about it, because meditation practices have varied over the centuries, and in the West, in medieval meditation, Christian monks meditated, but they were trying to be with God in the metaphysical realm. It was almost like astral projection, trying to get beyond this realm. This is not what's happening in Buddhism. Buddhism is trying to see that right here, right now, there's another realm that's more important than what it is. And that's kind of like the Matrix, right? So you see something here, you think it's real, but there's a deeper truth to everything. And Buddhism is trying to show you that. The Matrix is sometimes called a Dharma movie. Dharma is the teaching of the Buddha. So the Matrix is actually kind of teaching the truth of Buddhism there. Evolutionary psychology, Robert Wright writes a previous book about that, suggests that many people are deluded about what life is really about. And what Wright is really talking about here is that you may think that you're in control of your actions, but many of your actions are dictated by evolutionary biology, that we are taught to respond in a certain kind of way. We're not taught, rather, sorry. We instinctively respond a certain kind of way. So if an example would be, and one that Robert Wright actually uses, if you're out driving and someone cuts you off, then that may be an incident of road rage. Well, what's that all about? Is that something that you actually want to do? Maybe not. That's an instinctive thing, and it comes from millions of years of evolution prior to before us even becoming human, and that's still encoded in our brains. And what I mean by that is, millions of years ago, if someone stole some food from you or something, the proper response was to get deeply angry and respond to that. And if you didn't, that person would do it again and again. Maybe other people, or this is even before people, maybe other animals would see that happening, realize that you were sort of a weak person. So that kind of response was absolutely required. But the notion here is that Buddhism can make us aware of these instinctive things that may not be what we want to do, that you have a choice to get, to experience road rage or not. In Buddhism, everyone will experience it in the sense that you will, realize that these emotions are within you, but you will be able to sort of escort them out and not respond in that kind of way. And Buddhism looks at all sorts of instinctive urges that we have and realizes that, you are in control. Well, the self is an issue we're going to have to talk about, but it is your decision whether or not that, to be influenced by these things, and you can step away from them if you like. And that's one of the core teachings here. And we'll talk about how this all impacts environmentally in a moment. But just to think about everything that we've been saying, it's more like a psychological practice, right? It's a practice of living. And, people have argued that, like Thich Nhat Hanh, that Buddhism isn't actually a religion in this sense. And that's important because there's, the Buddha is not considered a deity by someone like Thich Nhat Hanh. He's considered a great person, maybe a genius for working out everything that he did. But he's not a deity. He's not someone who created the universe or anything like that. He's just a person. Again, a very bright person, a gifted person, but just a person. What it is, according to Thich Nhat Hanh, is this spiritual dimension isn't, trying to, as he notes here, escape life or dwelling in a place of bliss outside this world. In other words, trying to be like in heaven or in a metaphysical realm, but discovering ways to handle life's difficulties and generate peace, joy, and happiness right where you are on this beautiful planet. So Hanh will actually spend a lot of time talking about the earth. And there's a newer book that came out. So this is from The Art of Living that I'm quoting, but that newer book is Zen and the Art of How to Save the Planet, which focuses just on this. It's co-written by a nun at the Plum Village Monastery, and her name is Sister True Devotion. So that's an interesting book too. But I wanted to kind of get to the core teaching of Buddhism here from Han. So this is, again, we're quoting from The Art of Living here. Robert Wright's book is Why Buddhism is True, another interesting book if you're would like to pursue this further. So impermanence. Impermanence, number of words in Buddhism thinking. Pali. Again, the Buddha didn't write anything down. It's conjectured he spoke in this ancient language of Pali. Anaka is the word, but you'll see it in different languages, but it's really referring to the same thing. But remember in Western thinking that we had this binary structure and opposition. Remember in lecture number 5, I had that line going across the whole the whole screen, and I talked about things up in the metaphysical realm like the soul, things down below like the body, and that we saw was not only a cornerstone of Christian and Judeo-Christian Islamic thinking, but also Western metaphysics, and Plato certainly buys into that too. And what this is all about is a preferring of things that are, permanent, that are up there, whether it's heaven or the immortal soul. This whole notion of immortality and lasting forever is being privileged there. So it's not just there's dualism, but one side is definitely being privileged, which is the soul. Buddhism, impermanence is celebrated, an essential part of the belief system, which is what I note here. And that's kind of remarkable, right? And it's a complete, I'm not saying complete opposite, but it couldn't be more different. One culture, has privileged and is fascinated with permanence and trying to achieve permanence for human beings. And this other belief system, Buddhism, just the opposite. Thich Nhat Hanh, impermanence is in fact something wonderful. If things were not impermanent, life would not be possible. A seed would never become a young plant. A child couldn't grow up to an adult. Transformation wouldn't happen. So impermanence is important for life. Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. So that would apply, of course, to the physical realm that, the Greek thinkers, talked about too. But to Han, that's the real world, right? So Plato said that this isn't the real world. There's the realm of the idea of ideas, and in Christianity, it's heaven and all. But no, in Thich Nhat Hanh's thinking, this is the real world, and we should celebrate change because everything is possible. A child couldn't grow into adulthood without it. And of course, there's the acknowledgement of change here too, but there's a focus on something else, right? Like decay, like not that we grow into adulthood, but we go from adulthood to old age and death, and that's sort of the focus. But Han wants to focus on all these positive aspects of it and the sort of miracle of change around us. So I note here that in the Western tradition, the focus is often on this metaphysical realm. Yep, Thich Nhat Hanh, we may agree with the truth of impermanence, and yet we still believe as though everything is permanent, and this is the problem. What prevents us from taking the opportunities available to us right now to act and change the situation, to bring happiness to ourselves and others. With the insight of impermanence, you won't wait. You'll do everything you can to make a difference, to make the person you love happy, to make to live the kind of life you would like to live. So this really gets to it, right? If you imagine that your real life is coming up, you're going to have eternal life, that this is just this, momentary place here, there'll be less emphasis, according to Han here, on life right now. But if this is everything that is right now, this period of time, whatever you have on earth, 80, 100 years, whatever it may be, that's it. You would take advantage of every single moment. I mean, this is the gift of life, which is the way Buddhists will talk about it. And you do not want to waste that gift. Every moment is here and it's wondrous. So meditation practice will constantly pull people back to the moment This is what is important. Why? Because you only have this moment once. You won't get it again. You don't have immortality. You just have this. But that's all the more reason to enjoy life here and now. And again, in other traditions, you don't want to enjoy it too much. That's the problem. You don't want to become too consumed by the body. But in this way of thinking, the middle path is to enjoy life without, succumbing to deep temptation. We may fear dying, and yet we find it hard to imagine growing old. You cannot believe that one day you might not be able to walk or stand. If you're lucky, one day you'll be old enough to sit in a wheelchair. Contemplating this, we value every step and know that in the future it will not be as it is now. Recognizing impermanence allows us to cherish the days and hours that we are given. We can be at peace knowing that we are living our life to the fullest. So this is a kind of a logical move, really, right? And that is, if this is the only life that you have, it would be absolutely absurd to neglect this life and to wait and imagine something else. This is all there is. So you would want to, to experience everything as fully as you could, to enjoy it here, to be in the moment, to not let it slip by, to not, to daydream away while life is happening. You'd want to value your body. You'd want to value loved ones and the conditions that we have for happiness at this moment. I mean, it makes total sense, right? If this is all there is, well, then how do you experience it the fullest? If this is life, how do you live life to the fullest? And you certainly wouldn't do it by imagining another realm. You'd do it by immersion in the here and now. Again, sorry for these big quotes. The Buddha taught 5 remembrances, a contemplation exercise to be recited all the time. So what would these be? Practice the 5 remembrances. You'd like to take a moment to read these lines very slowly with a pause to follow. So what are these? I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. So these are things you should say every day to yourself. I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone that I know are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separate from them. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. They're the ground upon which I stand. So this is an entirely different relationship, say, to death, to suffering, that it's inevitable that you're going to die. You will not transcend death in this religion. That's why it's not even quite a religion to many people. You will instead, the best you can do is to see that death is inevitable. But if death is inevitable, it's kind of like that thing you may have heard, that someone is diagnosed with a fatal disease. They're going to die in 6 months. Well, what do they do with those 6 months? Well, what would you do? I mean, put yourself in that mind, and would you go do all those things you wanted to do, or would you just keep plugging away at a sort of existence that's not making you happy? In this view, that's the condition of life. You are going to die. I hate to deliver the bad news, but in this way of thinking, there is no way to transcend death. You are going to die. Now, the question is, what are you going to do with the life that you have left, whether it's 6 months or 60 years? What are you going to do with it? And that's what Buddhism focuses on, and living life fully then. So what is the art of happiness? And again, that's the book from which this is quoted. It's the art of living deeply in the present moment. The here and now is the only time and place where life is available, and where we can find everything we are looking for, including love, freedom, peace, and well-being. So you're not going to find these things in another realm. It's only here, right now, in this place where that is going to be found. This is a confusing doctrine, the doctrine of non-self. I'll go through it in some detail here. So, human beings are imagined often in Western thinking as composed of a body and soul. To Buddhists, to like Thich Nhat Hanh, there's no separate soul. But there's in this approach, not only is there no separate immortal soul, which is true, there's no human self that endures through a lifetime. So this is a radical idea. So it's not just that, you have a soul or a mind, whatever, that's caught up in your body and it's not going to live on beyond you. So the notion that you just live a lifetime. But that self, do you think is central, is not even going to last. So Thich Nhat Hanh actually quotes from our friend Heraclitus here about you can never bathe in the same river twice. The river is always flowing. And what he argues, that which is different, is not only has the water changed, and he's varying what Heraclitus actually says. Heraclitus said actually step in the river, but Thich Nhat Hanh is saying bathe in the river. He's also saying our thoughts, perceptions, feelings, and state of mind are also changing from one moment to the next. So we cannot swim twice in the same river, nor can the river receive the same person twice. Our body and mind are an ever-changing continuum. This is a radicalization of an already radical idea from Heraclitus, that not only is the river changing, but you have so radically changed, when you decide to go back and take a swim in that river, that you can't even say you're the same person. It's not the same river. That was Heraclitus's reflection. According to Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddha's reflection is, it's not the same you. You're not the same. And that makes, in a certain sense, in a certain way, a lot of sense, right? That we change over time, and, it makes sense that we change. But in this way of thinking, it's so radical that to talk about a continuity of a self just doesn't make sense. He notes here, although we seem to look the same, we can still we're called by the same name, we are different. No matter how sophisticated our scientific instruments are, they're never going to find a self or soul there. So it's the idea of a soul, but again, it's suggesting not only is there continuity beyond life, but even throughout life, we are so changing. And let me go and explain this further. It's I think one of the most difficult things to wrap our head around in this thinking. According to Buddha's core message on no self, impermanence and interbeing, the mind is not a separate entity. The mind cannot leave the body and reincarnate elsewhere. So again, that's no dualism. Body and mind depend on each other in order to exist. Whatever happens to the body influences the mind. And that makes sense in monastic thinking, right? So we see that even with Milton and Thoreau, who would, of course, be influenced by Buddhism, that, the body and mind are interconnected. There's no separate soul. But again, what's coming here is more radical. And again, to be very clear, it's like you may see depictions of hell in Buddhism, according to Thich Nhat Hanh, to see that there's sort of an immortal soul or a self that's separate, that endures over time, is what he calls here a very diluted kind of Buddhism. It's lost the essence of Buddha's teaching on no self and impermanence, true nature of no birth and no death. And we'll get to that in a moment. But the notion here again is that, again, impermanence, if everything is changing, this sort of the Heraclitean change, where a river's not even the same, well, it makes sense that we would then be changing too. We're not the same as well. So to talk about a continuity of, being the same person you were when you were 3 years old, yeah, that's a stretch according to this thinking. That's not really, who we are. And what Hanh says, and he's trying to get to the core teachings of the Buddha, that, rebirth is a better description than reincarnation for what happens. And he likes the idea of talking about a cloud and a continuation. So, water you know, when a cloud rains down, we cannot say that the cloud is reincarnated in the rain, but continuation, transformation, manifestation are all better words, and perhaps the best word, and Han likes to coin and reinvigorate words, would be remanifestation. The rain is a remanifestation of the cloud. Our actions of body, speech, and mind are a kind of energy that we are always transmitting, and that energy manifests itself in different forms. Again and again, we are continued in our children and our students and everyone whose lives we have touched. So what's he mean by that? Well, you are not going to endure, in the sense of yourself is not going to endure this life. There is no eternal life in this way of thinking. And your life is not, yourself isn't even going to endure throughout your life. It's going to be constantly changing so much. But what will endure are the things that you do in the world, the impact that you have on people, that energy you put out there, that will change the world. It will change, maybe in the most obvious way, like with children, but people you influence, people you meet, people who are changed by you. You will continue on in the world. The Buddha lived, 2,500 years ago and continues on in the world. Thich Nhat Hanh, he wrote like over 100 books and was so influential, he will continue on for quite some time, I would imagine. You may continue on too, depending on, what influence you have in the world, how you impact the people around you in the world itself. So that's the reincarnation you get, that transformation of the world. But, you too are always changing form. You browse through a family photo album, come across a photo of yourself, where is that little child now? Are you actually that child? I mean, that child, once lived and now isn't really the same self anymore, according to Thich Nhat Hanh. Today, you look, speak, and act and think, look, speak, act, and think differently. Your form, your feelings, your perceptions, they're all very different. And again, it's like the river thing, right? Everything is changing. You're changing too. You are very different than what you seemed to be before. He notes here you can invite the child to breathe with you, to walk with you and enjoy nature with you, in the sense, you're reminiscent of the child. But it's clear that child isn't really alive still. That child, endures in you, I suppose, but that's not the same person that you were. I mean, one would hope that you would have grown a good bit then. In this very moment, all of us are dying. Some of us are dying more slowly and some of us more quickly. If we can all be alive now, it's because we're dying at every moment. There are two levels of truth about birth and death. At the level of conventional truth, we can say that birth is death, beginning and ending in creation, and that would be the Western sense, too, I would argue. In that sense, birth and death are real, they're important, they're useful concepts, but are not the whole truth. The whole truth is that you endure beyond life, not as a soul that continues on, but your influence in the world continues. So what's the strategy here for dealing with the fact that we're only here and now? Well, it's complicated, but two major things are: one, live this moment as if you're dying, because you are dying, and enjoy life, and it doesn't mean like carpe diem. In fact, this sort of the middle path is where you enjoy life but not succumb to that, and you still focus on the important things in life. And Thich Nhat Hanh is very much a proponent of what he calls engaged Buddhism, that we have to do good in the world. That's a big part of who we are and what we're doing. But also know that, not only live in the moment, but impact the world in a positive way. So, and again, sorry for these really long quotes. So we tend to think that we're a separate self, and we're going to get into this, but we have these wrong views. And one of the wrong views, we have a tendency to think that we have a separate self that is born at the moment, must one moment die at another, that it's permanent during the time that we are alive. That's a wrong view according to Buddhist thinking. The second wrong view that many of us hold is that is the view that we only, have this body, and then when we die we'll cease to exist. This view binds us to all the ways that we are interconnected with the world around us and the ways in which we continue after death. We're going to get to this in a moment, because the belief here is we're not just this body, we're connected with the world itself, the earth itself, and all life itself. It's simplistic to think that we are just limited to a single body. The third wrong view is that many of us have is the idea that what we are looking for, whether it be happiness, heaven, or love, can be found only outside us in a distant future. And we may spend our lives chasing after and waiting for these things, not realizing that they can be found within us right now in the present moment. So you may think that wealth or power and all these things will make you happy, but in Thich Nhat Hanh's view, it is within you already. You have everything you need right now in the present moment to be happy. You may think you need to go out and acquire lots of things and do things, but no, right now in this present moment, there is the potential for all happiness and satisfaction. So this is Robert Wright, actually. Sorry, there's a helicopter flying overhead. I'll let you read this while it's flying over. Sorry about that. But a very strong statement here that if you start doing this thing, if you separate yourself out and say, this is mine, and, you have selfish desire, craving, attachment and all, this is going to be the source of so much trouble in the world that you'll want these things for yourself. But wait, self? There is no self. Why would you want that for yourself, especially when you're interconnected to everything? And the argument is made that if we could get beyond this thinking, we wouldn't, if we cared for everyone in the same way that we care for ourselves and saw us interconnected, we wouldn't do that. So again, Thich Nhat Hanh from The Art of Living and Robert Wright from Why Buddhism is True. So let's get to something directly relevant for us, is Buddhism and ecology. Two related ideas, in fact. Yeah. At first, it seems as though things exist outside of one another. The sun is not the moon, the galaxy is not another galaxy. But looking deeply, we see these things are interwoven. We cannot take the rain out of the flower or the oxygen out of the tree. And how could you do that, right? The tree has taken in oxygen, it's taken in carbon. You can't pull it out of it. It's all deeply interconnected. We cannot take the Father out of the Son or the Son out of the Father. We cannot take anything out of anything. We are the mountains and the rivers. We are the sun and the stars. Everything inter-is. So we cannot take the wave out of the water, just as the wave is the water itself. We are the ultimate. Many still believe that God exists separately from the cosmos, his creation, and we saw that as one particular belief that can happen in Christian thinking and Judeo-Christian thinking. But you cannot remove God from yourself. You cannot remove the ultimate from yourself. Nirvana is there within you. So this is very much similar to what, Ernst Hegel was talking about just with animals, in that everything is interconnected in an ecosystem, an ecological system. That's the core of what we mean by ecology, that all life is interconnected. Thich Nhat Hanh argues, and I think it's pretty clearly true in Buddhism, that's the Buddhist belief, that all life is connected. But it goes further because, Ernst Hegel was talking about biology, the interconnection of individual, species biologies all together. But in this view, everything is connected. It's not that all life is connected. It absolutely is here, but more, we're connected with the water in us, the air in us, the ground minerals that are in us. Everything is connected. We are part of the earth. We were born up out of the earth, right? Our constituent part comes from what we get from the earth, what we eat, and ultimately, is walking around as a human being. we can visualize, in other words, this is a way of looking at the body as, like, as a wave, and our cosmic body as all the waves on the ocean. We cannot see ourselves in other waves and all the other waves. We can see ourselves in all the other waves and all the waves in us. So in other words, if you think of yourself like a wave, like an individual part of the ocean, okay, fine. But you can't think of yourself as separate and apart from the ocean. The ocean is in you. I mean, there may be an aspect of individuality to a wave, but you have to think about yourself and all the other waves. You're all interconnected. There's no sense of an individual self here. It's all interconnected. And and I won't go through it all here, but, we are children of the earth, made of all the same elements and minerals. We contain mountains, rivers, stars, and black holes. In every moment of our lives, the cosmos is going through us, renewing us, and we are returning ourselves to the cosmos. We are breathing the atmosphere, eating the earth's food, creating new ideas, experiencing new feelings, and we are emitting energy back into the cosmos in our thinking, speech, and actions, in our out-breath, and our body's warmth, and then releasing everything we have consumed and digested. Yeah, the notion here is that, again, everything that you are is of the earth. You are children of the earth. We are children of the earth. We are come from the earth. Everything that is in us is from the earth. Everything is going out of us. So, the breath going in, the breath going out, all becomes part of us for a moment. It's not part of us. That's the insight here, that there is this deep interconnection, which I'll show you in a moment. Thich Nhat Hanh actually coins a word for this. So he notes, Thich Nhat Hanh, he was looking for an English word to describe our deep interconnection with everything. He liked the word togetherness, but finally came up with the word interbeing. The verb to be can be misleading because we cannot be by ourselves alone. To be always means to interbe. If we combine the prefix inter with the verb to be, we have a new word, interbe. To interbe reflects reality more accurately. We interbe with one another and with all life. Yeah, that's a remarkable statement. So being will, of course, be a preoccupation like with Plato and all. And, the notion that there is this one self, you are. There's, Descartes, the cogito ergo sum, you think, therefore I think, therefore I am. Well, in this view, that's a misguided view, in that we are not individual. So if you're trying to do what Descartes wanted to do and imagine a single individual, yeah, that's misguided. You inter-are. It's not, you are, therefore everything is, therefore you are, and you are, therefore everything is. It's this deep interconnection with everything. There's no separation. Everything is deeply interwoven and interconnected. And Thich Nhat Hanh's word for that is interbeing, that, think of it in terms of your individual being an individual being of anything, be it a blade of grass or whatever. It's misguided. Everything everything is interconnected. Yep. Again, continuation of this, and environmentally, it's important, right? We need to be able to see that we are part of the earth and to see that the entire earth is in us. The earth is also alive. It has intelligence in the form of human beings and other people, other entities, and creativity. If the earth were in innate matter, it could not give birth to countless great beings, including the Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and Moses, and so forth. The earth is also mother to our parents. Looking at the eyes of misdiscrimination, we can establish a very clear non-discrimination, we can establish a very clear relationship with the earth. So first, regarding this, Thich Nhat Hanh actually wrote a book about the parallels of Buddhism and Christianity and the strengths of each, and they're interconnected too. But here, the strong statements: we look at the earth with our heart and not the eyes of cold reasoning. You are the planet, and the planet is you. The well-being of your body is not possible without the well-being of the planet. And that is why, to protect the well-being of your body, we must protect the well-being of the planet. This is the insight of emptiness. Yeah, and that makes sense, right? If we are bodily and we want to take care of our bodies, why wouldn't we protect the planet? Why would we introduce toxic materials into the environment that we will ingest back into our bodies that could, make us very ill? Why would you destroy or radically alter the climate if you knew it would change and, your life and hurt you and your culture and maybe kill you. I mean, you wouldn't do these things. You would have to realize that there's an interconnection, realizing that there's an interconnection between, your body and the planet, you and the planet. You would, of course, want to do everything you could to preserve the planet. That's the argument here. And again, that's from The Art of Living, but Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet is also a great work to consider. So non-craving, in Pali, the word is hanha. In Thich Nhat Hanh here, the concentration on non-craving is an opportunity to take time to sit down and figure out what true happiness really is. We discover that we already have more than enough conditions to be happy right here in the present moment. So I want to go through this, but the core idea here is expressed that part of the problem in the human condition, in this diagnosis, this Buddhist diagnosis, is that we crave a lot. We crave all sorts of things. We crave buying new things. We crave lots of clothes, big houses, cars, all these things. Why do we crave them? Because we think they'll make us happy. We're told they'll make us happy. We buy into the idea that they're going to make us happy. But it doesn't work. According to this assessment, you keep adding things on from the outside. They will not make you happy. Instead, you have to enjoy this present moment, to accept that all the happiness that the conditions for happiness are right here, right now. So the solution here then is not to try to keep getting more and more things, but try to understand that more completely, and something like a meditation practice would do that, allow you to see that, you don't need anything further, that you're everything that's needed. Environmentally, right, this is very important because so much of the problems that we're having today, especially in, wealthy countries like the U.S., has to do with cravings. So we crave more and more and more, and those cravings are destroying the planet. And according to Thich Nhat Hanh, how sad is that? Because satisfying those cravings, well, first, you'll never truly satisfy it, but that doesn't lead to more happiness. If we're trying to get happiness, there is another way. And that's, Buddhism as explained here. And what is the art of happiness is living deeply in the present moment. The here and now is the only time and place where life is available and where we can find everything we're looking for, including love, freedom, peace, and well-being. Happiness is a habit. It's a training. With mindfulness, concentration, and insight, we can free ourselves from the feelings of restlessness and craving and realize that right now we already have more than enough conditions to be happy. That is the contemplation on non-craving. So this is it, right? Everything that you want, whether it's love, freedom, peace, well-being, whatever, is right here in the present moment. The idea, again, is not to try to acquire things from the outside, but to get into the habit of happiness. And that's a training. And it's a training to be able to separate your mind from those cravings and to see them for what they are, and that they are not going to be, rewarding at the end of the day. And again, this is, almost tailor-made, even though it's, 2,500 years old, this thinking, but it's almost tailor-made to a modern consumerist society, because it's saying, here is a way to separate yourself out from those cravings and to try to get a better handle on what it really is to be happy, which is a practice that will do it. Contemplating non-craving is another way to practice the concentration on aimlessness. Each one of us has a big block of craving inside. We are always looking outside of ourselves for something to make us feel satisfied and complete, whether it's food, sensual pleasure, money, a relationship, social status, or success. But so long as we have the energy of craving in us, we're never satisfied with what we have and with who we are right now. True happiness then is not possible. The energy of craving sucks us into the future. lose all our peace and freedom in the present moment, and we feel we can't be happy until we get what we're craving. But even if you do get the object of your craving, you will never feel truly fulfilled. So the idea here is this sucking into the future, that we're always looking to the next thing, into the future. We're always imagining if we had this or that or did this or whatever. And according to Thich Nhat Hanh, that's not the way. The way is to experience this moment now, rather than thinking about a moment in the future. And in Buddhism in general, the notion is not to dwell on the past either, and again, not to try to pull yourself into the future by getting this next new thing or whatever, but just to take the time to experience this moment truly. And that goes back to the thing about impermanence in human life, because, live every moment as if it truly is, live every moment as if you're dying. Because in this view, you are dying. It may take you decades to die, but you will die. But why then not experience this moment? And of course, in this view, these cravings that we have for things beyond the moment are not going to get us there. So we may well spend our lives chasing after wealth, status, influence, and sensual pleasure, thinking they will improve the quality of our life. And yet we end up not having any time left to live. Our life becomes just a means to make money and become someone. The Buddha used the image of a fish biting on an attractive bait. The fish doesn't know that there's a hook hidden in the bait. It looks so delicious, but as soon as the fish bites, it gets hooked and caught. The same is true with us. Once we see the hook, whatever it is we're craving simply won't be appealing anymore, and we will be free. At first we think that we let go of the craving, we'll lose a lot. But when you finally release it, you see that, you're not lost anything at all. You're even richer than before. So that's it. All these things that, that we're told to pursue, wealth, status, influence, whatever, they're like something appealing on a hook, but you just get hooked into the habit of attempting to achieve those things like wealth, and it becomes this sort of never-ending cycle that you can't be free of, because it's an endless. You think your saving will be your desire will be satisfied, your craving will be satisfied, but it won't. In this view, you will just keep craving and craving and craving. So this approach is it diagnoses the problem of us trying to get happiness, and it sees it as sort of something we've been tricked into. We've taken the lure, but we got hooked on it. But it then does more, because it's offering a solution to this, which is to try to become more mindful of the present moment. We know we don't want to get hooked. We know we don't want to spend all our time and energy on it, and yet we can't let go. This is because we don't know how to apply our insight. We need to take time to reflect deeply on our situation, to identify what it is we're craving, and then, identify the hook. What's the danger? What's suffering hidden in it? So what does all that mean? It just means that if you think that acquiring lots of stuff is going to make you happy, you will spend, as he notes here, all your time and energy doing it. You'll work long hours to acquire, money to buy all these things and all. But what you really should be doing is taking the time to reflect on the whole process and opt out of it. And that's what, the argument is made here that Buddhism can do. Chasing after signs of wealth, success, status. We may do it not because we think it's important, but because we think others expect it of us. But when we truly see the cost of these pursuits, the hook in them, we won't want to keep running after them anymore. We'll want to make use of the insight that we are already enough. We don't have anything to prove. Yeah, so Hanh is not only addressing the fact that we may have, I don't know how to put it, like an internal craving for these things, but there are external pressures as well that, having things like status and power and wealth are things that we perceive as important. So we have to address that too, that it's not just our craving, but the pressure put on us to achieve those things. But again, he says, it's not worth all the effort in pursuing them. It's just a hook, and it just gets us hooked on it. Instead, we need to free ourselves of it. And again, think of this from an environmental point of view in terms of, our class or discussions of minimalism and all. This is an antidote to that problem, and specifically of sort of rampant consumerism. We may take refuge in our works not because we need the money or because we really want to do it, but because our work distracts us from the painful feelings deep inside. We're rewarded by a sense of achievement in our work, and before we know it, we get addicted to our work. Maybe we turn to films, TV, the internet, or computer games, or we listen to music for hours on end. We think these things make us feel better, but as soon as we turn to them, we feel just as bad, if not worse, than we did before. It's become a habit to search for the phone or computer or immerse ourselves in another world. We do it to survive, but we want to do more than just survive. We want to live. So Hahn argues that, it's not just that we want these things and all. We have all these activities that we get involved in, whether it's like watching TV or, surfing the internet or online shopping and all. And we think that's, that it can be rewarding, and we do it, we think that it makes us feel better, but it really doesn't. And ultimately, this argument, and if you really want to feel better, you need to stop and think about why you're doing these things, and you need to try to pull free of those habits. And the only way to do that in this argument is to have a practice of living, which involves like meditation practice, to focus on what's going on and try to understand it rather than just succumbing to it. Hahn notes here that, that when the Buddha was giving a talk to a number of business people, perhaps he was aware that many business people have a tendency to think a bit too much about success in the future. The Buddha used the expression living happily in the present moment 5 times when speaking to these business people. He emphasized that we don't have to wait for more conditions of happiness in the future. We don't have to look for success in order to be happy. Life is available only in the present moment, and we already have more than enough conditions to be happy. We can train ourselves to keep bringing our attention back to everything that is going well in the present moment. And that's really what it comes down to. And it is a training because, as a practice, the idea here is that you keep succumbing to these appeals of the world, the cravings or social pressure, for them and all. But the idea is to pull back from that and to say, and it is a striking thing to say to a bunch of business people that you already have everything that you need, right? So for like corporations trying to sell us something, they're constantly trying to tell us that you need more, you need more, you need more. Well, in this view, no. You have everything that you need. I mean, it's like the ultimate counter to consumer culture because, don't consume because you already have what you need. There's no need to consume those things. They will not make you happy. That's the argument. Everything that you have is right now in the present moment. You may not be aware of that, but that's why you need this practice, this meditation practice, to focus on the beauty of the present moment and the fullness of it. And if so, you won't want to consume any more. You won't need any more. So again, from The Art of Living, if you find any of this interesting, I heartily recommend that particular book. So Henry David Thoreau, because, he was an important milestone for us, we didn't really focus on how Thoreau was influenced by Buddhism, but he was, by Eastern religion in general. He makes clear references that he was influenced by Western philosophy and Buddhism throughout Walden. And Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's one of the leading proponents of mindfulness practice, a very important sort of secular mindfulness. Jon Kabat-Zinn is very important because he uses this as a way of, as an actual clinical treatment. So it's actually connected with the Boston Hospital. And he starts in the 1970s onward, and he has this mindfulness-based stress reduction. And it's a way of making people happier who aren't happy or are dealing things like with chronic pain and how to deal with it. And he's a very important figure for that reason. So it's Buddhist thinking, but it's sort of taking it out of its religious context altogether, something Thich Nhat Hanh is already well on the way to doing. But it's also, but it's seeing it really as just this sort of practice that anyone can do, regardless of any religious, whatever religion you may adhere to, you can still do this mindfulness practice. But he argues, Jon Kabat-Zinn, that Thoreau's 2 years at Walden Pond were above all a personal experiment in mindfulness. I talk about this in the introduction that I wrote to Walden, but I think it's a really important point because it focuses on, it sees what Thoreau was doing in Thoreau's, for example, his rejection of capitalism and consumer culture and all that. By capitalism, I just mean rampant consumer capitalism, especially like we have today with this sort of free market capitalism that, isn't really taking into account the happiness of individuals. Yeah, so this is Jon Kabat-Zinn, long quote. He's saying the same. From a Buddhist perspective, our waking states of consciousness is seen as being severely limited and limiting. Meditation helps you wake free of this. And he talks about sages, yogis, and Zen masters who have been exploring this territory for thousands of years. But then he goes down here at the very bottom. He says, but this view is neither particularly Eastern nor mystical. Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, saw the same problem with our ordinary mind state in New England in 1846 and wrote with great passion about its unfortunate consequences. So the argument made by Jon Kabat-Zinn here is that Thoreau, in part influenced by Eastern thinking and Buddhism, really takes it to heart and is doing the same thing that we have in Buddhist thinking. He's trying to live in the present moment. So let me give you a little more of an example of that. Henry David Thoreau, his 2 years at Walden, according to Jon Kabat-Zinn, were above all personal experiment in mindfulness. He chose to put his life on the line in order to reveal and to revel in the wonder and simplicity of the present moments. But you don't have to go out of your way to find someplace special or to practice mindfulness. It's sufficient to make a little time in your day for stillness and what we call non-doing and tune into your breathing. All of Walden Pond is within your breath. The miracle of chasing seasons is within your breath. Your parents and your children are within your breath. Your body and your mind are within your breath. The breath is the current connecting body and mind, connecting us with our parents and our children, connecting our body with the outer world's body. It is the current of life. There is nothing but golden fish in this stream. All we need is to see them clearly. So the argument here is Thoreau was practicing this sort of mindfulness, and he got it from Eastern thinking, which he studied. And actually, then that is what the experience of Walden Pond was to sort of see everything interconnected and there. And read this way, I think Walden, the book, opens up very differently. And so how does this actually play out? Where could you see Thoreau doing this? Thoreau would often sit in his doorway for hours and just watch, just listen as the sun moved across the sky and the light and shadows changed imperceptibly. There were times when I could not afford to sacrifice the bloom of the present moment to any work, whether of the hand or heart, or the head or hand. I love a broad margin to my life. Sometimes a summer morning, having taken into my accustomed bath, I sat in my sunny doorway from sunrise to noon, wrapped in reveille amidst the pines and hickories and sumacs, in undisturbed solitude and stillness, while the birds sang around me or flitted noiseless through the house, until the sun falling in at my west windows, or the noise of some traveler's wagon on the distant highway, I was reminded of the lapse of time. So what's the idea here is that Thoreau would just sit and try to immerse himself in the present moment, and found great happiness there, and found sort of the meaning of life there. And he would just sit for hours and just watch and listen to what was going on around him. Listen to the sounds of birds around him, feel the air on his face, feel the sun on his face, feel all that. And that was to him, the great importance of life was there. And that's coming right out of Buddhism. I mean, I'm not saying Thoreau didn't currently develop it and all that, but this notion that, you could just sit and enjoy life without striving for anything, without craving anything, but just see that all the happiness that you would ever need is right there in that particular moment. That was, Thoreau's great insight here. John Kabat-Zinn again, try to realize the bloom in the present moment, if you are up early in the morning, try going outside and looking, in a sustained, mindful, attentive looking at the stars, at the moon, at the dawning light when it comes. Feel the air, the cold, the warmth, the sustained, mindful, attentive feeling. Realize that the world around you is sleeping. Remember, when you see the stars, you are looking back some millions of years in time. The past is present, now and here. Then go and sit or meditate lying down. The argument here is that, again, it's not just Thoreau did it 170 years ago, but that you could do it, that we all can do it, that this is really, in this Buddhist way of thinking, what is so important, that we should be doing just this, that we should be really trying to appreciate the present moment as much as possible. So when Thoreau says, it was morning and lo, it is now evening and nothing memorable is accomplished, this is waving a red flag in the front of a bull for go-getting, progress-oriented people. But who is to say that his realization of one morning spent in his doorway are less memorable or have less merit than a lifetime of busyness, i.e. business, lived with scant appreciation for stillness and the bloom? Thoreau was singing a song which needed hearing then as it does now. He is, to this day, continually pointing out, for anyone willing to listen, the deep importance of contemplation of non-attachment to any result other than the sheer enjoyment of being, all far better than any work of the hands would have been. So, this is it. Thoreau then is sort of a siren's call to pull us away from all those activities that we think are meaningful. And again, that's what Thoreau did. He left to go to Wollongong rather than live a conventional life. But according to John Kabat-Zinn, influenced by Buddhism in particular, he just, realized that the main goal in life was to live in the present moment, enjoy the present moment. And it is sort of throwing down the gauntlet, or metaphor here, the red flag in front of a bull for go-getting, progress-oriented people. That would be all of us that live this conventional Western way of thinking. That would be it's addressed here. So, Buddhism, I think, is important in its influence on the West, like with Thoreau, and continues today. But I think it's just something to think about, and that's why I wanted to conclude the class on it, because Western thinking is important, influential, it's all across the planet, but it's only one way of thinking. There are other ways of thinking, and some of the things that Western thinking has really become enmeshed with, like consumerism and all, it's not the only way. There are other ways of approaching it, and some of them, relatively ancient, like Buddhism, for thousands of years have addressed the issue of how to deal with these things. So I think where we stand in the West right now is a revitalizing of Western tradition, in part because we are now aware of so many other traditions. And Thoreau becomes sort of a model of that. He looks at these other traditions and he tries to incorporate them into his own life. I think that's something that we really need to think about doing now. So it's not that that Western, tradition is the end of the road, but rather that it can be revitalized by new thinking being injected into it. And I think that's required in an environmental sense because, we cannot go on the way we're going with Western trajectory. We have to change some things. That change can come within Western thinking, but it can come without too. And again, to sort of revitalize that thinking. Okay, well, I hope that gave you something to think about. Not only Buddhism and Henry David Thoreau and all, but the Course itself. Thinking a little bit about, Western culture, where we've been, where we're going, and where we need to go and what we need to do to address the challenges that we're confronting. And there's none bigger than the climate crisis. So, again, thank you for attending the lectures, and I wish you well. So take care.